Huh. 1-inch holes, 3x3 uprights, 1,000-pound capacity, $250. Not bad, right? 1-inch holes, 3x3 uprights, 1,000-pound capacity. $2,500? Are they crazy? Welcome back to the GymCrafter podcast, everybody. My name is Tim. I am the head gym nerd here at GymCrafter.com, the website that I built to help ordinary folks like you and I build home and garage gyms that we absolutely love. And I have got a fun podcast that is brought to you by one of you today. Actually, I just took a week off, and man, I feel great, ready to get back at making videos for you guys. And during that week, I got an email from one of you asking kind of a frustrated question. And that question was, hey, I'm looking for racks. And I'm looking at some of the more reasonable price stuff, and then I look at these high-end companies, and are they just ripping me off? Like, how can they charge so much more for what, on paper looks to be the same thing, and hey, that might be a good idea for a podcast for you. And I think that after thinking about it all last week while I was off, it is a good idea for a podcast, and not only in the realm of why does the high-end stuff cost what it costs, but what is the low-end stuff and why does that cost what it costs? What are you losing out on there? And then where, as we look to furnish our home gyms, where should we fall? Like, where should we look? Should we look at the high-end stuff? Should we look to save money and go with the more budget-friendly stuff? And that's the question I want to answer for you guys today in the podcast. I want to take a look at some key areas of things that you should look at when you're looking at gear for your gym. And then what do you miss out on by going with a budget option? What do you gain by going with like a mid-end option? And what do you gain by going with a high-end option? And hopefully by the end of the podcast today, you guys will have a good set of tools to know what you're willing to live without, what you want to go for in the end, what you're willing to spend money on, what you're not willing to spend money on. And actually, there's a couple other things that I think are really, really important. Number one, I think that unfortunately with the proliferation of budget gear, and boy, you can't scroll your Instagram or Facebook these days without seeing ad after ad after ad after ad for budget company. Most of my favorite garage gym YouTube channels now, even the ones that used to stick to what I feel is really higher quality stuff, you're seeing more and more of this. Here's a budget rower, and here's a budget bike, and here's a budget rack, and here's another budget rack, and here's yet another budget rack. And I was part of that problem for a while, right? I had a couple of budget racks here in the gym. I actually had a couple that I didn't even bother to show you guys. So I think that what that does is that number one, it gives people a misrepresentation of what's actually available out there and what's important to have in some of this equipment. But it also, more importantly, it skews our idea of what things should actually cost. When you look at rack after rack after rack after rack that's $500, $1,100, $500, $1,100, you become very resistant to spending $2,500 or $3,000 on something that appears on paper to be the same thing, right? We start to do these mental gymnastics of, well, it's probably good enough, right? And in some situations, good enough is good enough, but I think in most situations, having experienced a lot of the budget stuff in my gym and seeing what happens to it over time, unfortunately, a lot of these advertisements and a lot of these, videos on YouTube, I unboxed it, I looked at it for a week or two, if that, and here's what I think, and gee, you should buy one, right? Make sure and click my link. But today's not about clicking on links. Today's about helping you guys to make just overall decisions. I'm not going to use a ton of specific examples. I want to speak more in generalities. I don't want to just dump on some of the low-end companies, and then I don't want to, single out any of the higher-end stuff that maybe I haven't actually tested myself. I just want to give you guys some general strategies to look at for, where is your money most well spent. The other thing that I think is important to realize is when you look at the spectrum of prices, typically, and this is true of all things, not just home gym gear, when you look at very budget, you give up a lot for that, right? But if you spend just a little bit more, you tend to get a lot for your money. It's almost a disproportionately large increase in value for the money you're spending because it doesn't take a whole lot. And not only the construction of the gear, but also just in the company itself, which we'll definitely talk about, to get just a ton more for your money. And then the higher end you go, the less and less you get for larger and larger and larger sums of money. I used to sell electronics and appliances for a living, and one of the things I sold was high-end audio. And high-end audiophiles, if any of you are out there understand this, that my $20,000 pair of speakers isn't good enough because it's missing a half of a decibel on the low end, and it's missing this particular frequency range that even my dog can't hear. But I'm going to spend $40,000 for a new pair of speakers, which happened Pretty regularly, actually. And I want that extra, that extra half of a frequency range down in the low end because I just want to know that it's there. And so there's that exponentially smaller increase for the more money you spend. And the same is true of gym equipment, right? The difference between a $10,000 rack and a $15,000 rack isn't really all that great. But the difference between a $1,500 rack and a $2,500 rack is massive. So we'll talk about what goes into those differences and what you can expect. So the way that I want to do this is I want to go through kind of each type of thing that you want to look at or each quality of product that you want to look at, and then what you get at the entry level, mid-level, and high end. And I got my handy dandy list of notes because this is one that I've recorded several times already, and I realize that I probably need to have more of a structured way of talking about it. Otherwise, I'm just going to ramble on more than I already have. So let's dig in, and we're going to start with something that I realized with the budget stuff that I had, which is if you can't see it, feel it, touch it, or you probably won't measure it, this is a huge area of differentiation between the entry-level stuff and the high-end stuff. So the entry-level stuff, if they think that you can't see it or won't measure it, they're gonna cut the corner there, right? They're not gonna cut the corner on a main thing that you can just see right out of the box, but they are gonna cut corners on things that you can't see and that maybe you won't measure, like steel gauge and things like that, which we'll talk about. At the high end, what they do is, even if you can't see it, they're gonna overbuild it, right? They're gonna make every possible aspect of the equipment overbuilt. I was looking at some accessories for my rack from a company called Frog Fits, and they've got this cool little accessory that goes over the nuts on the rack, and there's these little holes for screws, and inside the hole, it's knurled. And right in the description, it says, do the inside of these holes need to be knurled? Absolutely not. Will it help you at all? Absolutely not. But do they need to be knurled? Absolutely they do. And that's kind of a good kind of example of some of these higher end companies. Even though you don't necessarily need these little tiny touches here and there, these little tiny build quality differences here and there, they're going to include them, and those tend to cost a lot more money. But let's talk about some specifics when it comes to that build quality, and I've got some specific examples for you in those areas. So the first one I want to talk about is, and probably the biggest section of this podcast, is the actual materials that the gear is built from. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. So when we talk about home gym gear, it's typically made of steel. And that steel, what a lot of people understand is steel is not just iron ore that was dug up out of the ground and melted and it's all the same. It's absolutely not all the same. The stainless steel that these uprights are built out of, that I'm sitting in, for those of you listening, I'm sitting inside of the Dane 2.0 by Fringe Sport. The front uprights are stainless steel. This is not the same stainless steel that a surgeon would use for surgical tools. There's just different grades at different price points, and you have to balance quality with price, because the highest you're not going to find a rack made out of surgical grade stainless steel because that would be unaffordable. But when we look at things, I'm going to use a barbell as an example. So the difference between a $99 barbell on Amazon, a $250 barbell from something like Rep Fitness, and then a $700 barbell by American Barbell, which I've actually had all three of those here in the gym. So all three, even though they might have the same tensile strength, the same bar diameter, they might all have bushings in the sleeves, they might all have the same measurements, they all weigh 45 pounds. They're distinctly different because of the quality of the metal. Now, the misleading thing is you'll never see this called out typically when you look at the listing for the product. Here's where the difference comes in. I've talked to lots and lots of people who have bought the $99 barbell, and this has happened. Not only you can find tons of reviews online like this, but you can also just find this in real life experience where somebody will buy a $99 barbell, they'll put it on their rack. A lot of times folks who buy that level of product aren't necessarily the most consistent with working out, so they'll work out for a while and they'll leave it racked on their rack or their bench with weights on it. Maybe they leave 225 pounds on it, and literally like a couple of weeks later they come back and the bar has bent permanently. So that's a result of a couple things. Number one, their specs are probably not exactly accurate, something we aren't going to measure and can't measure. But the quality of that steel alloy inside the bar is such that it's just not going to withstand that constant load on it. Now, we go up to a Rep Fitness barbell for like 250 bucks. I've been using the Badlands bar from them quite a bit and really, really like it. However, what you'll notice is it's not the highest grade steel, which we'll talk about next, but it's enough to where I know that barbell is not going to bend. I know that for most lifters, it's not going to bend, it's not going to break, it's not going to get brittle over time. It's going to last you a lifetime, right? For most ordinary garage gym folks who aren't lifting a ton of weight, that barbell is going to last you. It's going to be the first and last bar that you'll ever need to buy if you're looking for a power bar. Works for me, works for lots of you. Now let's look at over here on my wall, I've got the American Barbell Chewy Bar. It's a $700 barbell. Again, if you look at the specs, 29 millimeters, aggressive knurl, a hybrid system of bushings in the sleeves. It's a hard chrome on the sleeves. It's stainless steel on the bar itself. Really not much different than most other bars as far as specs go. However, the quality of the steel alloy inside, this is designed for people that lift very, very heavy. So a good example is if you've ever taken a paper clip and you bend it once, it doesn't break, you bend it twice, it doesn't break. At some point it breaks pretty easily. That's a good example of the lowest quality alloy. There's other metals that you can bend and bend and bend and bend, and they won't get soft, they won't metal fatigue, they won't break over time. That's the alloy in the Chewy Bar. What happens with a lot of barbells, especially if you lift very heavy, is the stress on that bar as you lift it and the bar bends, and then you put it back down and the bar goes back to straight, you lift it and the bar bends. You do that hundreds and hundreds and thousands of times over your lifting career. A lot of bars, including the one from Rep Fitness at $250, are going to start to develop what are called microfractures in that steel, and over time they'll get brittle. Now again, for most average lifters, that is never going to come into play. Your bar's never going to snap. But you do read situations and stories of power lifters and competitive lifters where their bar does crack and snap over time. And that's the difference when I'm talking about things that you can't see, feel, or touch, or you probably can't or won't measure. The quality of that alloy inside that barbell is going to be nicer and nicer as you go up the price point. But a lot of people, like I said, they look at those prices and they go, I'll just buy the $99 one. So this is where, and you're going to hear this a lot over this podcast, this is why I think it's very valuable to spend an extra $150 from $99 to $250. Although for most people, it may not be that valuable to spend another $500 to go to that high-end bar. Let's look at racks as another example. So these uprights are made, the ones I'm sitting in front of are made of 11 gauge steel, right? These are stainless steel in the front, they're regular steel in the back, and they're very sturdy, they're very durable. So aren't some of the budget racks, 3x3, 11 gauge steel, or maybe they're 14 gauge steel, but when we look at the quality of the steel itself, so one of the budget racks that I had in here was 14 gauge steel, it was 2x3 uprights, and after 4 months, I shined a flashlight inside the hole and the entire inside of that upright was rusted. It was a very low quality steel. It had not been galvanized. It had not been treated in any way, shape, or form to prevent that rust, literally in 4 months. And I live in Illinois. Well, it gets humid here a little bit. It's nothing like if you live on a coast or if you live near the ocean, which I guess is the same thing. But what happens is the quality of that metal is a problem. Now, I had a Titan 3x3 rack in my garage for many, many years. There was no rust at all on the inside of those uprights. So that's a good example of both are made of steel. One is made of a much lower quality steel than the other. Another example is one of the racks that I had in here was from a company who has been found out to be shipping, instead of steel racks, they're shipping aluminum racks. Because at first glance, who's going to test that, right? And what people notice is, hey, how come a magnet, how come a mag pen, or how come a magnet doesn't stick to the rack? And the reason for that is this company was building the racks out of an aluminum alloy instead of out of steel, because aluminum is much lighter. Shipping costs are a big part of the cost of the product, especially on an imported product. So, but even though on the advertisement it says materials include certain gauge steel, it doesn't say the whole rack is that certain gauge steel, right? There might be a bracket at the foot or the header. It might be the bolts they're talking about, but there is some steel in it. And what you're giving up on is, you're giving up on a lot of truth in marketing at these lower end companies. They will fudge what they can fudge, and if they get caught, because they're not here in the United States or they're not in the countries, the United States and Canada are probably the two biggest countries as far as buying home gym gear, just in the home gym market. And then Europe is okay, but it's real hard to import into Europe, and it's just not as big of a market. So those two countries, the problem is that it's very hard in those two countries, if you're a consumer, to sue a company in China or a company in another country, just the cost of an international lawsuit is cost prohibitive. So they know that they're going to get away with doing this stuff. So you'll see a lot of false advertising like that. The problem is that, gee, when you put a weight right on the front of the rack, it's not a problem. If you drop something on the safeties where the safety pulls on the rack, all of a sudden the thing just folds. And that's a safety issue, that's a product quality issue. So one of the things that I know is that if I buy something on Amazon or I buy something from Temu or I buy something from one of these companies who are just, they're making their company on just selling the least expensive version of everything, you really don't know what you're getting. And one of the things that I like is the peace of mind that I get when I go from that entry level to the mid level, like a Fringe Sport, like a Bells of Steel, like some of the Rep Fitness reps. Some of their stuff's creeping up into that higher end, right? But if you go up to the mid end stuff, one of the things I know is the peace of mind that I know that I'm going to get quality materials. And let's talk about Rep for a second, because even Rep wasn't always this way. There was a time probably 5 or 6 years ago even where they sold stainless steel barbells, and the quality of the stainless steel was so low that those stainless steel bars rusted in a lot of people's gyms. Even here, I had 2 of them. One of them did develop little tiny bits of rust. Like I said, I'm not in a super humid climate. There's no salt water here, but I know some folks who live near the ocean, those bars rusted badly. Rep has decided, they're like, hey, we're not going to do that kind of thing anymore, and the quality of their stainless steel is really excellent now. But they weren't always that way. But I know now going forward, if I buy something from Rep that says it's a certain thing, that at very least that it is that thing. Now, what do you get by going up to a super high-end company, right? Is there an even better quality of steel? And the answer is yes. The steel is going to be much more conformed to a uniform dimension. It's typically only used by higher-end manufacturing facilities. Again, not something that they can put a spec on their website, but if you want the highest quality metal that's not going to fatigue over time, it's literally going to be the first and last one you're ever going to need to buy, those higher-end companies tend to offer that. Now, same as I said before, is the difference in price worth it? And honestly, these budget companies, their prices are creeping up and up and up. The most recent ones, I've seen a lot of 2nd generation or 3rd generation coming out from these more budget companies, and their racks are $2,000. And it's like, well, you know, for $500 more, you could get the rack I'm sitting in, right? You could get the Dane 1.0, which Fringe Sport still sells. It's 1,000,000 times better than the one that's selling for $19.99 right now. And one of the ways that it's better is you get better quality everything. And we'll talk about a couple more important components to that. Now, is it worth that $500? Yes, absolutely, all day long, every time, even if you got to save up for a couple more months to get there. It's 100% worth it. Is it worth another $8,000 to go to, a rack from Oak Club or Prime Fitness? It might be to you, it might not be. But just understand that you're getting not nearly as big of a jump. So I like knowing that those kind of mid-tier companies tend to offer exactly what they say they're going to offer. Speaking of steel quality, this is one I have personal experience with that I never would have thought of unless it happened to me. And that is the quality of the bolts that hold everything together. Talk about something that you're never going to see on a spec sheet, right? There's not a single person out there, with some higher end exceptions that I can think of, just some esoteric stuff, that talk about the hardness level of the bolts, the quality of the bolts. Higher end companies tend to at least list that, but even so, like, I don't know what an SAE rating is, which is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe that's how they rate hardness of the bolts and the durability of the bolts. But what happens is, I had a budget level rack in the gym, and over 4 months of testing it, and this is why I think it's important that you look at, whether it's mine or somebody else's, that you watch YouTube channels from people who actually test things over a longer period of time. This is a great example of something I never would have found out. So I used this rack for about 4 months for me and some of the clients in my gym. And what happened was it started bending out of square. It started, instead of standing upright, it started kind of leaning on me a little bit, and more over time. And I couldn't figure it out. I was looking, the uprights weren't bent, the little braces that held everything together weren't bent. So eventually I went to sell it, and I listed it on Facebook, and the guy comes, and I'm taking it apart to load it into his truck. And what I noticed is all of the bolts are bent. Almost every single bolt at the bottom of the rack had bent under the load of using it, whether it was the barbell racked on the unit or whether it was the weights loaded on the plate loaded trolley system or cable system. Those bolts had all fatigued and bent over time. And my thought is, how much longer before those bolts started to crack and break? And it's something that you don't notice until you've used your stuff for a long time. Again, back to, am I confident that Fringe Sport uses bolts that won't do that? Yes, absolutely. Am I confident that Rogue and Rep and all of even the higher end companies, the Oak Clubs and the Sorinexes and the Prime Fitnesses, are they going to use bolts that are going to last? Absolutely. But talk about things that you can't see, feel, touch, or even measure for most humans. Those bolts are a big difference. And what you'll find is that better bolts are much more expensive. So when you're talking about lowering your production costs so that you can offer things at these budget prices and you can list the same specs, because I get these questions all the time. Hey Tim, this rack has the same specs and it's $300 as this one, which is $1,200. Why would I spend $1,200? And bolts and the steel quality, all those things go into that. Keep in mind that the lower price companies, their goal is to hit a price point first and not a quality level, right? They're just concerned about making it, because honestly, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a little bit, they're marketing companies, they're not fitness manufacturers. They're literally like, what can we sell you today that I can put in your social media feed enough times? And there's studies out there that say, if I shove this in front of somebody's face, there's a certain number of times that if we can get people to look at it, a certain number of people will buy it. That's why they keep showing you those ads over and over again. So they're just concerned about, how can I spend as much money on advertising and as little money on manufacturing as I can to get more people to buy it? And gee, they're not going to notice it's kind of a piece of junk until a year into the deal, or 18 months into the deal, when it's too late, right? And then you've wasted your money. So those bolts were a big one. Another one, since I've had several pulley systems in here. Now, I've talked about this before. There is no difference in smoothness from aluminum pulleys to nylon pulleys. I want to be clear about this. Nylon pulleys are what you'll see in higher quality stuff, like Force USA stuff uses nylon pulleys. You can upgrade to aluminum if you want. There's no difference in feel because of that. It just looks different. Your commercial gym equipment all uses nylon pulleys because it's just as smooth and it actually makes your cables last longer. There is a difference though between plastic pulleys and the nylon and aluminum. And the difference is twofold. Number one, plastic is a much softer material. So when you load up those cables sink in. When it sinks into that pulley and kind of sinks into the plastic itself, it pulls and it drags, so it's not as smooth. The other thing is, and for any of you who have some of these budget things, I know for mine, for all of the racks I had in here that were budget level that had a pulley system, the edges of those pulleys were cracked and nicked and chipped and dinged to the point where some of them were even developing cracks towards the center of the pulley. And so when you're looking at quality level that people aren't going to measure, again, at first it's like, cool, looks, it's got pulleys. Looks like a pulley, smells like a pulley, quacks like a pulley. It must be a pulley, right? And so, and at first it's great, they work great, but over time what you notice is that they degrade over time. So that's another way that a lot of these companies have just shaved based on just material itself. I want to talk about another one, is the cables. One of the biggest things I saw happen with this budget stuff over the course of time having it is that the cable jackets themselves started to crack and chip and flake off. If you go and if you've had a budget system for a while and you go up and you rub your hand up and down that pulley, you'll notice that there's all these little black flecks of plastic on your hand. And for mine, in the course of 4 months, I was already seeing the exposed cable underneath. So what do you get when you go from a budget company to even a budget company who now, because of marketing, right, and they've raised their prices a little bit, they're like, it now includes aluminum pulleys. Well, they haven't changed the cable itself. So when I'm looking at an entry-level system, you get kind of the stuff I was talking about. When I go up to something like this Fringe Sport, which is definitely just kind of a mid-tier company, not a mid-tier company, they're a great company, but just kind of mid-tier price points as far as their product goes. Companies like this, companies like Rep, companies like Barbell Steel, and I'll just keep mentioning those three because those are the kind of the big three in that space, are trying to get you a lot for your money. They're trying to build stuff that you're going to love, stuff that's going to last a long time, but also stuff that's not going to kill your pocketbook. And cables like this are a great example. So these cables have a static load capacity of 1,000 pounds and a dynamic load capacity of 750 pounds. And the jacketing on the outside is very pliable, very durable. And it's going to last a long, long time before it stretches, before it has to be replaced. Now, all cables will wear over time and have to be replaced, but would you rather have to replace your cables every 10 to 15 years or every 4 to 6 months? That's a huge difference from one to the next. Now, the highest end people, what they will do is they'll use aircraft grade pulleys that hold 2,000 dynamic load pounds, and they'll overbuild, right? A lot of the things you'll see when you get to the really higher end companies is they overbuild just because, like I said, even if you can't see it, feel it, hear it, touch it, whatever, they want to make sure that it is the best possible thing that they can make because they love their pride in craftsmanship at that higher end is just so high that their character and integrity won't allow them to cut a corner in, even if it doesn't matter, right? Just like the knurling inside that hole I was talking about. So that's what you're getting. Now, is that going to be something that you notice as far as performance? Probably not, right? Like you and I are never going to load 2,000 pounds on a cable to see the difference. But for some people, it's worth that extra amount of money. For a lot of us, it's not. So again, is it worth a few $100s more to go from, a plastic pulley with a kind of a garbage cable that only has a 300-pound capacity up to a nicer system that's got a better weight capacity, allows you to load more weight on your weight stacks and will last a lot longer before needing to be replaced? It's a minimal price difference, but it is worth every single penny. Are you guys seeing a pattern here? As the more stuff I bring into the gym, the more I realize that it is absolutely worth going to the mid-tier stuff. And then it just depends on you whether you go to the high-end stuff. Like those barbells I was talking about, right? I have 4 American barbell bars on my wall. I am a big, giant barbell dork. I love barbells. It's just like those high-end audio guys, right? Does anybody need a $40,000 pair of speakers? Nope. Does most people need a $700 barbell, a $600 barbell? Nope. Most people don't need that stuff. But I like it, right? I like spending my money on that type of stuff. Now, am I going to buy that? Am I going to buy a matching rack? American Barbell is coming out with a rack just like this. Am I going to spend $6,000 or $8,000 or $10,000 or whatever they're going to charge on that rack? No, I'm not, because that's not as important to me. But I am going to spend a few more dollars in that budget stuff. So that's kind of the gist of this episode, but let's look at a couple more areas of build quality just for some more examples. And I think a big one is weight capacity. And specifically, we're going to talk about racks here, but this also applies to barbells pretty significantly. A big number that a lot of folks look at who aren't super knowledgeable about gym equipment, or even some who are, is they're like, what's the weight capacity, right? This one says 800 pounds, this one says 800 pounds, they must be the same. So I want to talk about how these companies measure it. Now, I mentioned dynamic and static load on the cables. It's the same thing with capacity on the rack. So I recently watched a YouTube video where the person was reviewing one of these budget level racks, and he said, hey, I know you guys are worried about how much weight can these things actually hold. So he put the safety spotter arms on, he put a barbell on there, and he loaded 300 pounds on the bar, and he's like, see, holds 300 pounds, no problem. Most of you aren't going to lift 300 pounds, no worries at all. And the whole time I'm thinking, put 225 on there and drop it on the end of those spotter arms. And I guarantee you that if you do that even more than a few times, the metal on the spotter arms and the uprights is going to start to fatigue, the holes are going to start to pull out of shape, and it's just not going to hold that weight. So there are deceptive and misleading ways to measure weight capacity. And what you'll see is even those aluminum racks I was talking about, they listed them as 1,000-pound weight capacity. Typically what they'll do is they'll take J-hooks and they'll put it on the front, they'll put a bar on there, and if they even do test it, they'll put 1,000 pounds on the bar and they'll step back gingerly and go, nobody move until we get 30 seconds under our belt. Okay, it's got 1,000-pound weight capacity, right? However, your better companies, your mid-tier companies, what do? So Bells of Steel on their YouTube channel just posted a video where they took their spotter arms and they dropped a bar loaded with 800 pounds from several feet onto the spotter arms to test the quality of the bar, to test the quality of the spotter arms themselves, and everything came out great. That's the kind of testing that we want. So I know that if Bells of Steel says these spotter arms will handle 800 pounds, I know they're saying that because they actually dropped 800 pounds on top of these things. When Rep Fitness says that their quick draw dumbbells are the most durable in the world, that's because if you go on Rep's channel, they're up on the top of their warehouse throwing these things off the roof and going, see, they're just fine. Whereas your more entry-level companies may say they're durable because they drop them gently from 12 inches at the exact right orientation. So the testing and what the specs are that result from that testing, I think, are very misleading. Now, what do you get for the higher end companies? If you go from that Bells of Steel rack that the spotter arms support 800 pounds, and you go up to a super high end company where their spotter arms hold 1,000 pounds. Well, typically what those high-end companies do, because again, they overbuild everything, you're now paying for a company who has probably dropped 2,000 pounds on those spotter arms or 1,500 pounds. Typically what happens is they are giving you a spec that is so much lower than the actual tested amount that you'll never, ever, 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 ever have a problem. And typically what you'll see is those higher end companies, they test more than once. So they actually have a little robot that picks it up and drops it, picks it up and drops it, and picks it up and drops it. A lot of the bumper plate companies do this for the good ones. I believe it's Homegrown Lifting had a bumper plate display at Home GymCon last year where they literally had their robot there that picked up the bar, dropped it, picked up the bar, dropped it, picked up the bar, dropped it over and over and over and over and over again to make sure that their plates don't deform and that their plates have a certain amount of bounce to them. And that's what you're typically paying for the mid-end and even definitely the higher end stuff, is the level of quality assurance, the level of testing is so far either meets or exceeds the specs that you see. Again, that peace of mind, guys, is worth money. This stuff you rely on, especially racks, J-hooks, safety arms, you rely on that stuff to literally keep you not just safe, but to keep you alive, right? If your rack folds like a piece of origami because you bailed on a squat, and you rely on being on the ground safely under the bar because you got out from underneath it, but that rack is now folded and is falling over on top of you, that's not a good reason to save 500 bucks on your rack. So think about it. A lot of these things aren't important until they're important. And when they are important, they're very, very, very important. And while safety and manufacturing are important, I know a lot of you out there also put a lot of emphasis on what things look like. So let's talk about a few things that you can see, that you can measure, that you can touch, taste, I guess, if you want to. And I want to start with finishes and powder coat, right? What I've noticed is that when I get entry-level imported stuff into the gym, it kind of looks like I'm guessing if I went to their powder coat factory that what happens is that they hang everything up, they have Tinkerbell eat some powder coat and fly by and fart the powder coat right on the stuff. Because it's literally like this little tiny dusting of powder coat where if you look at it wrong, it's like, oh, there's a scratch, oh, there's a nick. The other side of that is if you've ever bought like a Rogue rack or a custom, like a Crandall Fitness or an Irwin Fitness or even like a Surplus Strength where they're doing these, Black Widow is another one, where they're making these beautiful custom racks. Not only do you get more color options, which a lot of people are willing to pay more for. It's interesting, I found a lot of people are willing to pay more for something because of its looks than because of its durability. So that's kind of how we work as humans. But I think you could literally take like a chisel and a hammer to a lot of these things and the powder coat's not coming off. So that's the range. What do you get? So there's your low end, Tinkerbell powder coat, and then your high end, like Abrams tank powder coat. What do you get in the middle? And what you get in the middle is like this fringe sport here. You can just feel it. Just put your hands on it. You can feel the quality of powder coat. Now, will this scratch? I have scratched it, absolutely. But because I'm careless, because I've decided to move these shelves 4 times once it was built and I'm too lazy to loosen the rack, so I'm just like wedging them in and out. Yeah, I've scratched the powder coat. You can scratch it, absolutely. But it's not gonna scratch because I accidentally tapped my barbell against the upright. It's not gonna scratch because I leaned up against it the wrong way. So again, barely on, definitely worth the money for the much better finish. Now you might not get a lot of color choices. Reps kind of coming along in this area, but Bells of Steel, you got the old Henry Ford thing. You can have any color you want as long as it's black. And that's kind of the same thing. Now, Fringe has offered the Dane 1 in a few different colors. I'm assuming they're going to offer this 2.0 in a few different colors. But in the end, that powder coat is a huge difference. And that's the same with the finish quality in a lot of this stuff. Finish is definitely something that you can see and feel that is going to range pretty significantly from one to the next. Just because this says black powder coat and this says black powder coat does not mean that finish is even close to the same. The last one as far as looks go are something that have absolutely nothing to do with performance, kind of. So when you're looking at very entry-level stuff, they're going to only cut holes where it matters. And in fact, if you look at the sides of the uprights on a lot of entry-level stuff, they've only got holes every 12 to 18 inches instead of all the way up and down, because every hole that they punch, every logo that they laser cut costs money, right? And when you look at an entry-level piece, there's typically not a lot. And even some mid-end stuff, like one of the knocks I have on Force USA is when you look at the numbers on their uprights, right? Like I love this Fringe Sport one. The numbers for each hole are laser cut, super easy to see. The ones on the Force USA, they're laser etched. They're really, really hard to see. It's one of my biggest complaints about their stuff. Fantastic quality stuff, just those numbers are kind of useless because unless you've got a giant flashlight shining right on them, you can't see them. So that's a good example of kind of a way to cut corners and to spend less money on the manufacturing so they can offer you a lower price. But I think that when you have something like this that you're going to keep for a very long time, there's a couple ways you can look at it. When I'm looking at a rack like this, I really think that these numbers are valuable because otherwise you don't know if the trolleys are at the right, you don't know if the J-hooks are at the same, so you're kind of like, is this 1, 2, 3, 4? It's really functional and beneficial to have the numbers in there. Now let's look at Rep Fitness barbells. They're higher end barbells. On the inside of the shoulder, they have laser engraved logos and etchings, and that all adds to the price of the barbell, right? Does that help the barbell work better? Not at all. Their mid-tier barbells? Their mid-tier barbells don't have that, but it saves you money, right? So again, back to what do you get for your money? Entry level, you're getting almost nothing like that. You might even just get stickers, if that. You jump up to the mid-tier, and most good mid-tier companies are going to do laser engraving where it matters. And then you jump up to the high-end companies, and now you've got the Oak Club logo in different places, and you've got fancy script, or you've got cool fonts, or you've got a lot more of those types of details, some of which are functional and some of which aren't. But that's another thing that you can kind of see that you need to decide where your money is better spent. Again, going from the basic stuff to even the mid-tier stuff, you're getting a lot more for your money because it's things that you'll actually enjoy using. And again, if you buy right, you don't have to buy twice, right? Or buy nice or buy twice. And if you just do the right thing the first time, you're going to find that you not only have something that's durable enough to last you a long time, but it's enjoyable to use enough to where you're not going to go, man, I really wish my rack had this. I really wish my barbell had that. And you're really going to be happy that you spent that extra money. Next, let's move to something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily put enough value in, but it's one of the areas where the more entry level or more low price the company is, the more they cut corners. And you'll even see what's really weird is that this is an area where I think the middle tier companies probably do the best job, even better than the high end companies. And that's customer service. So customer service costs money. And what do we mean by customer service? Number one, let's talk about a customer service department. Can you call and talk to somebody who works for that company and speaks your language? That is super important because if you have a problem, if you have a question, if you're wondering, hey, I want to spend $3,000 on your whatever, but I need to know if it does these 3 things and I need you to measure X. If that company doesn't have a good in-house customer service department, Body Solid's a great example of this. Their showroom is here. Literally across a little tile walkway is their customer service department and their sales department. So if you have a question and you call them, they literally get up from their desk and they go over and measure, they go over and check, they go over and look. Same thing with Force USA. Their showroom is here, go through a door, their customer service and sales team is right here. They can literally go measure and check for you. And even when I was at the headquarters, I saw guys from the sales team wheeling out, they have these iPads on these little rolling tripods to have like, hey, what do you want to see? And the person's looking at the salesperson in the rack. That is amazing customer service, guys. Fringe Sport, some of the best customer service in the world. When I bought this rack, I had to call them a couple times and just great treatment all around. As opposed to, look at some of these more entry-level companies, and not only do they not have a call center that works for them, if you're lucky, they've got a call center they've hired out, and they've taught that call center how to use their website. So if you have a question that's on the website, which I don't know why you would have one, but if you don't want to use the website yourself to answer your own question, and you call them, they'll look at the website for you, but that's the extent of their knowledge. They're not trained in the product, they're not trained in working out, they're not trained in how to use it, they're not trained in how much room do you need around something, they're not trained in any of that stuff, and that's all very, very important and definitely worth some money. And the other area that customer service is important is return and exchange policies. And when you look at things, I'm going to use some general examples. I'll put a couple up over the screen here, so if you want to kind of screenshot them, you'll actually see the differences that I'm talking about. But when you look at the more entry-level companies, even the entry-level companies who are now trying to seem more not entry-level by changing the gauge of their steel from 14 gauge to 12 gauge, you know, just on the front uprights, by the way. Not exactly a help, but gee, it sounds good, right? And then, you know, they're offering, oh, we're offering 1-inch holes now, but they're not spaced so that you can use anybody else's accessories, but all sounds good, right? So they'll have a return and exchange policy that sounds good. They'll say, oh, 35-day return and exchange, no no questions asked. And then they'll read, and it literally says, except if there's any scratches in the unit. Well, if you've ever ordered from one of these companies, you know that the unit comes with, already pre-installed, for your pleasure, about 112 different scratches all over. So right off the bat, they don't have to take this stuff back. It can't have been assembled. It has to be able to be resold, which makes you wonder, where do the resold ones go, right? Are you gonna get a resold one? Has to be in the original factory packaging. If you've ever opened up one of these boxes, good luck getting all those parts, not only back in the bubble wrap that you had to cut off, but all of them back. I mean, it's in there like a giant Jenga puzzle. There's just no way that you're packing it back. And oh, by the way, you have to arrange for return shipping and you have to pay for return shipping. So all of a sudden, this no questions asked return exchange policy is just something they're literally never going to honor. And when I worked in electronics and appliances, we dealt with a lot of people who would buy from these fly-by-night websites, and then they would get a TV that was defective, and they're like, I can't even get a hold of somebody. They told me because I opened it that I couldn't send it back. And it's like, how am I going to know if it works or not unless I open it? You know, it literally says on those return policies, like, if the TV doesn't work, we'll take it back. But we only accept unopened returns, right? So these are the types of loopholes that you'll see built into these return and exchange policies that a company like Fringesport, for example, which has a 365-day, pretty much no questions asked. There's a couple of things you're like, hey, if you backed over it with your car, we're not going to take it back. You know, if you've taken a bat to it, we're not. Other than that, you call them, and you can call them because they have people you can call that work for the company, and they will take stuff back. They will exchange stuff. They will send you a replacement part. They will make it right. I know this because I've had to ask them to do that for me. And they just literally no questions asked. In fact, funny story about when I bought this rack. They shipped it in this giant crate with a bunch of other boxes, and I bought these shelves. Well, I was so excited to put this together and use it that I didn't bother to unpack or open the shelves. I just built the rack, and I ordered these 4 magnetic band pegs. And so I'm like, man, I don't see these things anywhere. They're not in any of the boxes. The shelf boxes look like they were factory sealed. So I'm like, they're just not here. So I called Fringesport, and literally they're like, okay, take a picture of everything that you got. I go, I already put the rack together. They're, take a picture of the rack, no problem. Send it to us, and then we'll just send you new ones. And with no questions asked. Like, clearly it was signed for, which we'll talk about in a second. Well, I come out and I'm like, let me check on the, so they were actually in the box for the shelves. They had opened them up to kind of not pack these little tiny things on their own. So I'm an idiot. I should have looked first. But I wrote them back and said, hey, I found them, no worries. But they were literally ready to just ship me 4 more just because I told them I didn't get them. No, again, no questions asked, no pushback. One of the big things that you'll notice too is a lot of these return and exchange policies from the more entry-level, budget-level companies will literally say, once you sign for it, it's yours. So the truck driver, if you've ever had one of these deliveries, they're gonna drop it and they're gonna go, can you sign this? I gotta go. They're not gonna let you open everything up to make sure you have everything there, but if you look at the fine print under where you sign, it says, I certify that everything is received as listed on the bill of lading above. You look on the bill of lading, it says 4 mag pegs, and I literally signed that I got those, right? I just signed to get them out here. I just assumed that I had everything. So a more entry-level company would have denied that. Now, what about a higher-end company? I would tell you that I have had some pretty bad experiences with higher-end companies. In fact, there is a company that I don't talk about on this channel, that I don't review on this channel, that I'll never talk about or review on this channel. And a lot of people have actually given me flack for it because they say, how can you have a home gym channel and not review this brand? And this is the exact reason why I don't review this particular brand. I was trying to figure out how many. I've had 8 or 9 direct interactions with this company because I do own some of their products. And every single time, it has been one of the single worst customer service experiences in my life. This company truly does not care about me as a customer, right? I don't know if it was because I wasn't spending enough money. I don't know if it was because I had a weird off-the-wall question, but I have had a terrible experience. And this stuff costs a lot. When I first built my gym, I legitimately thought my entire gym was going to be from this company. And every time I tried to buy something from them, it was like, no, I know you want to give us money, but screw you. It was just awful. So, and I've heard some similar experiences with some other really high-end companies. There's a couple going on right now that are all over the home gym forums and things like that, where it's like, dude, you're selling your stuff for tens of thousands of dollars and you won't take care of this customer? Like, are you kidding me? So honestly, from my experience, and I'm just one person, I've had better service from the mid-tier companies than anybody else. And I think here's why. These mid-tier companies rely on their reputation and their relationship with the home gym community to be successful, right? They can't afford to spend as much on marketing as the low-end companies, right? These low-end companies spend almost all their profit margin on marketing. These mid-tier companies aren't making near as much profit margin, which we'll talk about in a second. Really interesting fact about the industry. So they have to pick and choose where they spend their money. And what they realize is they're like, okay, where do we spend our money? Do we run another $1 million in Facebook ads, or do we have a customer service department, and do we take care of customers with problems? Because it costs about the same amount of money. Well, I would tell you that you're going to get a lot more from taking care of your customers, and you're getting a lot better marketing, right? Like when Fringe Sport does something like that for me, you know what I tell people about? I tell people about that experience, because I want them to shop there, because I know they'll be taken care of. And that's why I won't recommend that larger company I was talking about, because I don't want to recommend something where somebody comes back to me and goes, well, they treated me like crap. I will not recommend that. So these mid-tier companies seem like, because they don't have quite the reputation and loyal customer base that some of these larger companies do, where people will buy from them no matter what, just because it says that company's name on it. And they're not the entry-level company who doesn't care if you come back as a customer. They're literally just trying to churn and burn their customers as much as possible. They're more interested in just getting new customers. It's kind of like the cell phone companies. I always wondered this. Why is it that me as a customer for 20 years can't get the same deal as some new person who's just buying your phone today, right? Like, why can't I get the same price as them? I've paid you for 20 years. Right? And it's the same thing with the home gym companies. A lot of these entry-level companies, they just want that new customer. They don't care about their current customer. So anyway, in a long-winded way, customer service is super important, guys. And I think, again, keeping with the theme of the episode, what I've realized is I've used all levels of equipment that honestly, at least for me, the best customer service has come at the mid-tier. Now, I'm going to give you an exception to that because I want to make sure some of these high-end companies get the credit they deserve. If you buy something from a Black Widow training gear, you buy something from a craftsman, right, who's building stuff, who takes pride in his workmanship, you're going to get awesome customer service from Dean over at Black Widow, because he's super involved with the whole company. So I don't want to lead you to believe that all the high-end companies are this way, because they're not. Some of the folks at Surplus Strength that I've dealt with have been fantastic. Crandall Fitness, privately owned, family-owned company, awesome customer service. Irwin Fitness, same deal. So there's definitely some companies out there, that these high-end companies who understand and value all of their customers. I'm talking more about the high-end companies who are also large. You know, there's a very high-end company who I would love to buy some of their stuff, I just can't afford it. But they're like, it's going to be a year before we send you something. Like, yeah, we're going to advertise it on our site. We're going to take your money. We're not going to send it for a year. And oh, by the way, when that year's up, it's going to be another year. So I find that sometimes at high-end, those large high-end companies don't necessarily care. But anyway, in a very long-winded way, I think you have your best customer service experiences with some of these more kind of mid-price point companies. Now, I want to take a moment and touch on some of the back-end things that you don't see that go into the pricing of these companies. So we talked about customer service. Entry-level companies don't have a customer service department, so that's not fact. They don't have that overhead, right? So they can charge less, or they can make more. Mid-tier companies have one, but it's very expensive, so that has to raise their prices a little bit. It also lowers their margins. And then the high-end companies are hit or miss, right? Here's another one: research and development and developing products. Your entry-level companies aren't researching or developing anything new. They're typically doing one of two things. They're white labeling a product from Alibaba or another service like that. And what that is, if you're not familiar, is if you go to Alibaba.com and you type in all-in-one trainers for your gym, right? It'll come up literally with page after page, hundreds of these all-in-one trainers. And these companies go in and they go, that one looks like it's got lots of shiny things on it, and it's got a Smith machine. People really like Smith machines these days. And oh, by the way, the Smith machine for at least one of the budget products that I had, after 4 months, was so loose and wonky that it was just unusable. Another one, if you didn't go down exactly the right way, it got stuck. So just because it has a Smith machine doesn't mean that it's a good Smith machine, right? And I think that's something important to realize. But these companies that are white labeling, they go, okay, that looks good, $250, we could probably sell it for $1,000. Boom, let's do that. Let's put our name on it, let's sell it, right? And when we talk about how much markup these companies make, this is a really important thing to understand. These entry-level companies are making hundreds of percentage in markup because they have a huge marketing budget, right? How do I know that? A couple of reasons. I'm pretty involved in the industry, but number two, you can look at Alibaba and go, well, that's the one they're selling and that's what they paid. And oh, by the way, they probably ordered 1,000, which is that's what they paid. And wow, this is what they're charging. So just the markup is insane. And also, they can afford to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars on social media ads. Go to one of their websites. Go to any one of their websites. Again, I don't want to throw individual companies under the bus. And then watch what happens to your social media feed. You will be inundated. Every other ad will be from this company. And oh, by the way, who's in those ads? Professional strongmen who you know don't train on that stuff, who could pick it up and crush it with their hands, go, this is the best squat rack. I love having this squat rack in my house. And I guarantee, because I know some of these people, and I've talked to some of these people back channel, they're like, yeah, I don't use that. They're like, but they paid me a lot of money to say that, so I did, right? Which I guess, who can blame people, I guess, but that's kind of what so they have all of that money to spend on hiring these influencers, paying YouTube channels. I can tell you one of the things that hurt a little bit when I decided not to review that budget stuff is they actually not only send you the equipment for free, but they'll pay you for your time and your effort. And boy, were they surprised when I gave them bad reviews. So they weren't very happy with me. They're like, we paid you money. What are you doing? So they have these massive marketing budgets, right? And part of that is because they white label their things. Another option is that they are the factory that makes those. They aren't white labeling, they are that factory, right? And they're just selling direct. They're like, well, we're gonna come up with a brand name that sounds cool and super deluxe fitness equipment, right? Or what you've seen some of these brands, pretty funny. But and we'll sell direct to the customer. So their cost is even lower because they are the factory. So that's what happens with your entry level stuff. And that's one of the reasons why they can be at the price that they're at, is that they're not doing a lot of research and development. They're really they've got if anything, they've got a couple of engineers in a room who are looking at stuff that's successful and going, make something that looks like that. If you look closely, fun game for you, kind of like a Where's Waldo, go through the Alibaba stuff and look for all the things that are unusable. You'll see J-hooks sticking off the side of racks where you wouldn't use them. You'll see pulleys that you're like, wait a minute, how does that doesn't work. So it's pretty funny actually, but because you're getting stuff that's designed by engineers and not people who lift, which is never a good idea. Mid-tier companies. So here's a little bit of a gray area that you kind of have to understand. This is what they have to do. Most of these mid-end companies, they cannot afford to have a ground-up research and development company, right? Like your high-end companies, that's the people who run those companies. They are tinkering, they are building from scratch, they're doing things, they're coming up with a concept, they're working it out on a CAD drawing, they're iterating, they're prototyping, and that costs a lot of money, and that's one of the big reasons why they cost what they cost. These mid-tier companies that cut costs, what they'll typically do is they'll go and they'll spend actually a lot of time going to China. They'll find a reputable factory, because there are reputable factories, and they go over there, they make sure the quality control standards, they'll buy something that's kind of pre-designed already, they'll check it out, they'll test it, and they'll go, can you make these 3 or 4 tweaks in addition to putting our name on it, and then we'll sell it. And you see that is a lot of version 1 product. This is one of the reasons why I don't necessarily like to buy the V1 of anything anymore, even if it's something simple like a barbell. Because what happens is it's this white labeled product. They've made some changes, but you have to order a couple thousand of them. So then you got to sell them. And over the course of selling them, unfortunately, sometimes the consumer is like, well, this wasn't very good. Titan Fitness was always this way for the longest time. I'm not sure, they've definitely come a long way, but they were this way for, you never ever wanted to buy a version 1 of Titan Fitness because it was exactly this, right? It was like, okay, what are our customers complaining about? We'll make a giant list, and the V2 is not gonna have any of that stuff. So somewhere in there are your companies, and this is how Fringe operates these days in some instances. Now, some of Fringe's stuff is designed from the ground up. They're kind of a hybrid. Rep is also that way. Rep is moving more and more and more towards in-house design. And as you see that happen, that's why you're seeing their prices creep up. And then Rogue does makes design stuff in-house from the ground up. And that's, again, one of the reasons why their prices are where they're at. Bells of Steel is kind of in this middle gray area category. And I think that the companies are doing a better and better job of trying to make sure that V1, I know Kayvon over at Bells of Steel has talked pretty openly about this, about he knows that his V1 stuff didn't used to be very good, because he would send it to us and we'd be like, this isn't very good. But now he's doing a much better job of really QCing that product before it comes out in a V1. But it's still still in that gray area. But the cool thing is once they get that V1, so I'm sitting in front of the Dane 2.0, this is pretty much all fringes stuff, right? There's a couple of things that are holdovers from the V1, but this is pretty much developed and designed and tested and prototyped by Fringe Sport, which is one of the reasons I love it. And it's a super high quality product because of that. And so that's kind of where the mid-tier goes. It's a little bit of a gray area. So I don't mind working in that. I think a good rule of thumb is just don't, as exciting as the new product might be, just don't buy a version 1 of anything for the most part. If you look at most of these companies, you'll see within a year or two, 8 months for the Dane, they're gonna come out with a V2 or more. I think Bell's is on their version 4 of their safety squat bar. I think they nailed it on that one finally. But I just don't like buying stuff when it first comes out, even if it's not a V1. Wait and see what the actual reviewers say who use it for a while. There's a few channels that are really good at that. So that's where they are. And like I said, the high-end companies, we kind of went over where they are for research and development. But I think you have to look at that as part of the cost. The other thing that I would tell you that will matter to some of you and won't matter to others. So some people look at that middle area and go, I don't want anything like that. You know, I want something designed from the ground up. What you have to understand is also, here's what's going to happen to all of the products that these mid-tier companies make. Remember I talked earlier about the impossibility of foreign lawsuits or overseas lawsuits? Well, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find in Scandinavia and in China and in Japan and lots of places overseas where these American companies cannot file suit or just can't afford to file suit. You're going to see exact copies because as good of a factory as they try and find, until you own your own factory, what's going to happen is that factory is going to make some for you and they're going to make some for somebody else to sell under a different brand name, and you are going to lose all of the research and development, all of the intellectual property that's gone into it. Right now in other countries there are exact clones of the Dane 2. I had one of the viewers send one to me, and that's all that is. That's that factory just selling them to somebody else, and it's for sure it's an exact clone. So you have to really look out for that. If you go to China, there are Apple stores that aren't Apple, but it's Apple. It is like you couldn't, other than the fact it doesn't have an Apple on it, it's Apple across the board, the same quality, the same performance, everything, but just for a much lower price because they're literally taking Apple's devices and they're just copying them, right? It doesn't go into their cost, but they're losing a lot of potential profit because of those things. It's harder for them to sell in foreign markets because of those things. So again, they've got to walk this line that these guys don't have to walk and that these guys don't care about. So where, after a very long podcast, does this leave you, the consumer, who are on a budget and want to get the most for your money? So I want to talk about two types of budget, and I've been on both, right? There is, I'm on a budget because I literally don't have the money. Me and my family scraped and saved, and we've got $1,000 set aside for a home gym. We want to be good parents. We want our kids to be healthy. We want to set a good example for them. We want to be more capable in life. We want to not get sick as much. We want to not get injured as much, right? They value fitness, but they're only able to save up a certain amount of money. And they go, okay, this is all I can spend, literally. Then you've got, I'm on a budget because I just don't see the value of spending more money. And that's part of the reason I made this podcast, because I think a lot of people buy this entry-level stuff, not because they're in that first category of budget, but because they're like, the specs are all the same. Why would I spend more money? I can just get by on this. My comment section is full of people who are like, you can just get by with this. You can just get by with that. Oh, why would you do that? Just do this at home. Just go to the store and buy a piece of rope. You can use that. And that's all well and good if you're truly in the first category where you literally can't afford. But I think most people are in this second category, and this is for sure me. I usually have the money to spend. I'm very blessed that way. I'm very fortunate that A, I get to do this for a living, and B, if you've watched the channel, I buy most of this stuff. I do get some stuff for free, but typically a lot of the free stuff is that budget stuff that I'm no longer doing. So I bought this. I just got a brand new set of Savage bumper plates that I bought with my own money because I like those types of things. I'm very fortunate. The reason I spent that much on those bumper plates is because I see the value to me in my gym of having those plates, not only from an aesthetic perspective, but also from a performance perspective. And I think that if you really look at what you get, and hopefully I've done a good job over this episode of showing you just how much more you get by even stepping up from the entry-level stuff to the mid-tier stuff. And then also for some of you, like for me, it's worth it to go to the high-end stuff for barbells. It's worth it to go to the high-end stuff for the bumper plates because these aren't necessarily the least expensive bumper plates in the world. But My cable tower by Barbell Steel right here is kind of a mid-tier product and I love it. It's fantastic. My reverse hammer, which is my reverse hyper by Barbell Steel, is right over. I love it, right? It's great. Sometimes the budget stuff is good. I'm looking at a RipFit leg curl leg extension, which is fantastic. It's got a couple of opportunities, but really a great value for a few $100s. And I'll always bring you guys that stuff, but I wanted you to see what you get when you go from point A to point B and point B to point C so that you knew. Now, let's talk about the folks who truly can't afford more. What do? You want to build a gym, you see one of these budget all-in-one trainers and it has all of this stuff on it, right? You're like, man, for the $800 we saved up over the last year, we can get a Smith machine and we can get pulleys and we can get cables and I really like the idea of, you know, it comes with a bench for free right now and it looks like a really good value. What I would say is that of all the people in the world who can't afford to buy that level of gear, it's you. You have to make sure that your money is spent correctly the first time. Because if you can only afford $800 now, you can't afford in 4 months when the cable jackets are all stripped off, when the thing's bent out of square, when the inside of the uprights are rusted, when the Smith machine is stuck at one angle because it got stuck because you didn't go down perfectly straight, when you realize the barbell is painted and not powder coated, when you realize all of this stuff about the thing that you spent your $800 on, all of a sudden, the doodads and the bells and whistles that you spent all of your money on don't matter nearly as much as the build quality of what you bought. One of the very cool things about this mid-tier price point stuff is that you can build it a piece at a time. The entry-level stuff, you get what you get. You can only buy accessories from those companies. You usually can't buy accessories. And there's nothing, you can't build on, you can't add on. You can't buy a rack and then add a Smith machine, right? If you go mid-tier, you can start with a basic rack and then add a Smith machine. You can start with when I really started doing home gym stuff, I started with a body solid collapsible bench, a set of resistance bands, and those power blocks right there. I worked out on those for a long time before I put more stuff in my gym. And then I went to a Titan X3 rack. And then I went to one of those $99 Amazon barbells, which I had to replace. But you can build things a piece at a time, and I would really highly recommend for the folks who are in that first budget category, don't waste your money. If you've got all kinds of money and you want to, hey, I don't care if it doesn't work, then that's awesome. Give it a wing, and when you have to buy another one in 4 to 6 months, then it's no skin off your nose because you have the money. But man, if you are really on a tight budget, you literally cannot afford to go super cheap, okay? And one of the things that I've been looking at on this channel is how do I help you guys the most? How do I help people build, I say it every episode, how do I help people build home and garage gyms that they absolutely love? And I thought about it a lot this week because my brother wants to buy a pull down and row for his gym. And so I was showing him a couple examples and I said, you know, this Barbell Steel for $500, this plate loader would be perfect for you. It's a great, you know, and he's like, I'll probably just buy something cheap off of Amazon. And I was like, absolutely not. So if I would give that advice to my brother, that's the same advice I should be giving you guys here on this channel. So that's what you're going to see a lot of going forward. If I show it and I recommend it, and I'm going to show you some stuff and go, not a good idea. But if I show it and I say it's a good idea, it's something that I would recommend to my friends and family, and I do all the time. But I can tell you for a fact, 90% of the time, I recommend stuff from that mid-tier price point category to friends and family. I never recommend the entry-level stuff. I never recommend the budget. Even when I know that person can't afford to spend a lot of money, I'm still like, okay, here's what you should buy. Here's the least expensive one you should buy. Save up. Don't charge it. Just put some money aside. Until then, here's some resistance bands. You can get a full body training with the resistance bands and you can start working out now. You're not missing out on much at all. Right? So that's my general advice for people on a budget is if you're in that first category, don't waste your money. If you're in that second category, I've given you hopefully enough reasons to look at that mid-tier stuff. And that brings us to our last question and probably the second longest podcast that I've ever made. What would you guys like to see? So since you know my focus is on what's good bang for your buck, you know that I really like Barbell Steel, Fringe Sport, Rep Fitness. Those are the 3 biggies right now. What are some other companies you'd like me to take a look at? What are some other pieces of gear you'd like me to take a look at? I literally make this channel for you guys. I show you what I show you because I think that you guys, or at least some of you, will like it. So the best way, just like the topic for this episode, that I can make a channel that you guys will like, that you guys will subscribe, that you guys will ring the notification bell for. See how I did that? But that you guys will like and subscribe to and get value from is if I know what you guys are looking to see, and I will actually push back. So sometimes people are like, hey, what about, how come you're not looking at any Vesta stuff? How come you're not looking at SMI? Was another one that somebody reached in. And it's like, when I look at those companies, I'm like, wouldn't recommend it to my family, so I'm not going to bring it on the channel. But if you come across stuff where I look into it and I'm like, man, that's really good, I don't mind spending some of my money on it. I don't mind reaching out to the company and go, hey, hook a brother up, right? And I'll get you in front of, I think we're almost at 6,000 subscribers at the time I'm making this video, so thank you. But let me know what you guys think. What brand should I look at? What brand should I not look at? What other things should I do with the channel? I would love to know, because I want to keep making things better for you guys. And that's all I got for you this week. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching this long. And until the next podcast, I'm Tim with GymCrafter.